I need to give thanks, first of all, to Prairie Grove Baptist Church for allowing us to have this service here. I should also thank the State Historical Society of Missouri for providing resources, Missouri Humanities, National Trust for Historic Preservation, and Como Connect, a local organization, for helping us out as well. Also, our partners, Ozark Vitality, who is here, and you'll be seeing and hearing more from them, and Trivers, which is an architectural firm in St. Louis, and we'll talk about them a little later. So I'm only here for about 6 more hours with you today, and I want you to realize, no, seriously, no. I want you to realize that it's not going to be as painful as you might think it is, and history told by Doug Shipley is not a painful experience. It is a thought-provoking experience, but it's not painful. I will talk about things that you may have already known, you may have great knowledge about, but I may put them into a context that you may not have thought about before, okay? So, Harrison School, 1890, 1957. Why is Doug Shipley talking about Harrison School, 1890 to 1957? Doug Shipley wasn't even born in 1957, let alone 1890. So, why am I here? This is one of my most cherished memories, and I had lots of cherished memories of being in Tipton. I wasn't born in Tipton. I didn't grow up in Tipton, but I've been here many, 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 many times. One of those cherished kinds of things that I like to look for was eating at my grandparents' house, which was just down the hill behind Harrison School. The cute kid right there, that's me. Fairgrounds. Oh, wow. Remember the fairgrounds? Cute kid scratching his head. That's me. Little fellow right there, that's Lloyd Allen Moppins. Yeah, I hear it. And some of those others related to me, cousins of cousins, etc. This photo actually is out in the foyer of the hallway, right? And I bring it here because it represents something to me. This is just, I believe, was an ordinary day at Prairie Grove Baptist Church. Not this church, but the other church, the older church. Cute kid right there. That's me. Lloyd Allen Moppins. In this photo, I didn't count the number of people in it, but in this photo, there are at least 11 of my relatives. That's a typical Sunday at Prairie Grove Baptist Church. So why does Doug Shipley do a presentation about Harrison School? Because it was The Blind Side. The Blind Side, when there was a football player that wanted to play, and there was a lot of recruiting for him, and Ole Miss, he wanted to go to Ole Miss, and they kept asking him why he wanted to go to Ole Miss. And it got to be an NCAA investigation, and finally he came up with an answer. And the answer was, because that's where my people went to school. So I'm talking about Harrison School today because that's where my people went to school. Harrison School, also known as the Colored School. And the reason we're talking about it today is because it's unique in its own historic context. Harrison School was built in 1890 and operated until 1957. But if I just tell you that information, it's not telling you the whole story, is it? Yeah. Why did Harrison School exist? So let me put it in context for you. Moniteau County organized around 1845. Tipton founded about 1858. Harrison School opens in 1890. Harrison School closes 1957. And then we have 2023. Okay, I put it in context for you on a timeline, but it's still not telling you anything, is it? It's kind of like this. When you look at a puzzle and it's all put together, you start to get an idea of what the picture depicts. But if you only see parts of the puzzle, it's difficult to tell what the big picture is. And so I want to provide you some other parts to the puzzle so that you have an understanding of what the big picture is. We're going to do that by having to talk to you about history. Not all the history that you have ever learned about, not all the history that you ever want to know about, but we're going to talk about history and we're going to put it in context. When I talk about these things, yes, I'm going to mention slavery. Yes, I'm going to mention enslaved people. And let me clarify that. When I talk about individuals who were part of the slavery system, I generally call them enslaved. And there's a reason for that. A slave is a noun. A noun is a person, place, or thing. Okay? Since slaves weren't places, by law, they weren't people. So that would make them what? I will not call my relatives things. So, enslaved is a situation. Enslaved is something that happened to them, something that was put upon them. And so when I speak about the individuals, I will call them enslaved. Just opening. People remember the Missouri Compromise, 1820, Maine and Missouri come along and they come together. One free state, one slaveholding state, okay? Some of the first immigrants into the area were coming in from Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, South Carolina, etc. And here are some of the names of some of the individuals that came in the area first. If you look at the last ones, they talk about Redmond and Howard families arrive into the area. The reason I'm going to talk about Redmond and Howards, or I'm going to highlight them a little more, I could have highlighted the McClays, I could have highlighted the Moppins, I could have highlighted others. But the reason I'm going to talk about them is for the relation, the direct correlation in relation to Harrison School. Okay? What I'm going to do today is I want to type and weave this tapestry of history together so that you can see that when you pull one thread out, the tapestry doesn't exist anymore. Just like that puzzle that disappeared, okay? All of it goes together. Joseph and Mary, called her Polly Howard, start living in Cooper County area about 1820. William Redmond, 1823, born in Kentucky to Squire and Mary Redmond. We've got George in 1824. George is an enslaved individual. We'll speak more of George in a little bit, but you'll see how it weaves into history. Squire Redmond living in Missouri, 1827. Squire Redmond's family, 1830. And then we've got that individual, George, with Squire Redmond's family. 1830, Joseph Howard's family, shown living in Cooper County, 11 members, 4 enslaved individuals, including a male, probably known as Silas. Silas and an unnamed enslaved woman have a son, Francis Marion, who's also enslaved, and this is in Missouri, 1834. 1847 comes along, and they start passing legislation to make it illegal to educate enslaved or free blacks. Again, this is a talk about Harrison School. Possibly they feared that there might be some uprising if there was literacy. 1847 as well, we've got William Redmond marrying a Sarah Howard. There's that Howard and Redmond connection again. These are the white families that are marrying each other. But the marriage between Sarah and William join their families together, but it also starts joining the black families together as well. 1850, William Tipton Seeley, listed in Cooper County census, On the same sheet is this Mary Polly Howard. She's listed on the slave census as owning individuals, enslaved individuals, 4 males, 4 females. We believe including a 36-year-old male by the name of Silas that I mentioned before, and Marion, his son. Of course, 1858 comes along, and we've got the great founding of Tipton. Yay! Tipton's founded. William Seeley Tipton lived in the area of Round Hill, established the town of Tipton, mostly for the railroad commerce. Okay? And they laid it out, and Gloria and I talked earlier about how the town was originally supposed to be laid out and how it didn't quite live up to that. But the Tipton was formed. 59, Tipton Fairs. Now, I only put that in there because I showed you the picture of me when I was 1967 down at the fairgrounds. I loved it. I loved the tractor pulls and I loved the horses. That was me. Some of the prominent residents in the sites around Tipton: Gus Edward Duber owned the hardware store. Imhoff apprenticed under him, became a licensed funeral director. The McKay home was built around this time by the Petty brothers, brick manufacturers. Home was headquarters for John C. Freeman, but we'll talk about that too. Of course, you can't mention this without saying there was a Civil War. 1861, April 12th, 1861, Fort Sumter, South Carolina, the war begins. Tipton, not to be outdone, while Missouri didn't secede from the Union technically, Tipton seceded from the Union. Tipton. August 1861, Fremont did an order to confiscate property of Missourians in rebellion, and basically said that enslaved people were free. He had a commander-in-chief by the name of Abraham Lincoln who did not appreciate that and summoned him back and relieved him of his command. So it didn't happen, but that's what happened. Again, history and context. What does that represent? Anyone? Anybody recognize it? Immigration. Represents immigration. Okay. Looking for a better place, okay? Anyone else? What's the name of that? Statue of Liberty. Okay. Edward Le Boyer in France, who was the president of the Anti-Slavery Society, proposed this statue for the United States, not for immigrants, but for surviving the Civil War and the idea of liberty to enslaved individuals. Clutch the pearls. 1866, Congress creates the Civil Rights Act, declared that all persons born in the United States were now citizens without regard to race, color, or previous condition. That's 1866. 1866, Missouri legislature sought to enforce Article 9 by requiring each township or city board of education in the state to establish and maintain schools for African Americans in the jurisdictions where there were school-aged children numbering 20 or more. That's Missouri. Missouri was fairly progressive, considering. (1866) as well. Again, I'm showing this photo, and this is the side of the old church, because in 1866, Prairie Grove Baptist Church was established. It was established in the Grove, which is now the Prairie Grove Cemetery. And then they actually built the church just over here. The newly acquired freedom for individuals also gave them the right choice to come up with names for themselves, last names. And so that Silas that I talked about before, Silas chose the last name of Howard. Silas Howard was the first deacon of Prairie Grove Baptist Church. Also, 1866, George Redmond, formerly just George, and Anna Howard, wait a second, Redmond, Howard, we're doing this again, have a son, James Taylor Redmond, in Clarksburg, Missouri. That's James Taylor Redmond there. He'll figure into this story. Reconstruction. Reconstruction comes along. It's a way to help out the situation in terms of blacks and whatever, but it only lasts for a little bit. After Reconstruction, we have laws that are enacted to, or cultural laws that are enacted to subjugate blacks, newly freed blacks, back into some of the old ways, if you will. 1868, 14th Amendment signed, extended liberties and rights granted by the Bill of Rights to the formerly enslaved people. Now we're only up to 1868. This is after the war. In Tipton, though Missouri is somewhat progressive, it's still a town divided. Not by hostility, but it's a town divided somewhat by railroad tracks and geography. Even with the new freedom provided by the law, and the community was divided into black and white churches, schools, the town, geographically itself. Matilda Drinkwater in 1868 has a son. His name is Frederick Douglass Shipley. I like that name. 1869, James Milton Turner. James Milton Turner comes to Tipton, Missouri in 1869. He himself was partially college trained, and he came here as hired by the state of Missouri to look at what was going on in the school here in Tipton and around the state itself. Black man. And what he found here he didn't like. And when he reported that the school was being taught by what he called a very ignorant individual, the school board fired that individual and got somebody else, which tells me that the school board had the power to hire and fire in 1869. 1870, Missouri noted as one of the states that has the largest proportion of black children in schools. I was like, wow, it's amazing. 1871, first public school constructed with public funds here in Tipton, the one that's noted. 1873, Tipton Board of Education passes a resolution that basically agrees to fund and take care of black schools. Now, I said in 1869, there was already a school here, black school. When the person came to look at it, he found that the individual teaching it wasn't doing very well. Board fired him, got somebody else. 1873, they come along and they say, we're going to take care of the schools. Well, if they were doing it in 1869, if they were already responsible for it in 1869, there would be no reason to come up with this in 73, would there? 1879, the school board superintendent reported the numbers of black students that were attending schools. 95 black, 160 whites enrolled in school. 1881 and 1882, the Missouri School Board starts sending letters to Tipton saying, you all aren't doing what you're supposed to do. 1883, the board takes a vote, and they decide not to do anything yet because they're still looking for qualified teachers, is what they said. 1885, the school that was already in place on Morgan Street for blacks moves to Howard Street, which is where we are right now. This is Howard Street. that place that they brought the school students to was a place that was across the street from where Harrison School now sits. It was a house, and it was owned by John Calvin Shackelford, AKA Uncle Cal. Uncle Cal, to my knowledge, was not the teacher, but it was his house that they used. He was a Methodist minister that lived here. This is Otis. Otis is Shackelford's son. He didn't go to Harrison. He was born before then. But what he did was he went to Lincoln University. He wrote a couple of books, as Gloria and I have discussed. They're okay. But he wrote a couple of books. And you notice his mother's maiden name? Millie Howard. Howard Street. Y'all catching on yet? 1908, Shackelford wrote a book called Seeking the Best, and he dedicated it to the Negro youth. And it was kind of how to come up in the world and that type of thing. But we're still talking about separate but equal, the law of the land at the time. What does that look like for schools? In 1888, a bond levy was voted on to see if they would build a school, a new school. And they enlisted the help of the black residents here in this area to vote for that levy as well. And I say black residents, black males. Women didn't have the right to vote at that point. They enlisted the help of the black males to vote on this 1888 bond levy. They voted. Surprisingly, it was passed. And they did that by saying, hey, if you vote for this, we will build you a new school using the public funds. And they did. So they raised $12,000. $10,000 went to the white school, $2,000 went to the black school. 1888. 1890, they began building both the schools. Now, both schools were designed by the same architect, the very same architect. So if you look at the school building here and the school building here, they're similar, but smaller version, okay? Let's talk about the schools. The new Tipton Public School, which was, by the way, their third school that was built with public funds, has a 2-story brick building, 3-story bell tower, a basement, library, committee room. Second floor has classrooms divided by sliding floating doors. The school had 12 classrooms, noiseless self-folding seats, alabastine blackboards, and each room had a cloak closet. And there was an auditorium that seated 500 people in this school alone. The building was heated by 3 separate furnaces located in the basement. And I won't bore you how fast the air would recycle and that type of thing, but it was pristine, state of the art. Contrast. 1 story, 2 classrooms in a basement. Each room of the 2 rooms was heated by 1 coal-burning stove in the middle of the room. Separate, equal. Marion Howard, Marion and Jaylee Howard. Marion Howard, by then, is an adult. I've already talked to you about Silas was his dad. Marion here's with his second wife, Jaylee. And the reason I bring Marion up is because this undated photo of him shows that, he was something to be reckoned with, or not the photo, but him in general. He was something to be reckoned with. He had a wife and child in slavery, and the child's name was Mary Frances Howard. Keep that in mind. And in 1891, Mary Frances Howard married Frederick Douglass Shipley. Howard marries a Shipley. Okay, I'm getting there. In 1894, the school board of Tipton had hired an individual to come and teach at Harrison School, because Harrison started in 1890. 94, school board hires an individual to come teach. It was Marion Howard who basically stood up to the school board and for whatever he called the individual or used some kind of language or what have you, the school board decided not to have him come to teach, and they rescinded his contract. Well, that caused a kerfuffle, and the individual sued Marion Howard for doing that. They threw it out in court, ultimately. But the thing that it shows is that not only were they looking for the best to come and teach, but they would stand up for who they had teaching their children. That's a program from 1899, Harrison School commencement. Again, Harrison School typically went from the first grade to the 8th grade. And so they had commencements at the 8th grade celebration. And this one is 1899. Remember I told you about the public school that had an auditorium that seated 500 people? Well, since Harrison didn't have an auditorium, it typically held its commencement exercises at the Opera House. C.C. Hubbard, Christopher Columbus Hubbard, was a well-known educator at the time. Came to Harrison School to teach, probably one of the best-known early educators at Harrison School. And C.C. Hubbard left Harrison somewhere around 1900 or thereabouts and went to Sedalia to teach at Lincoln High School, the black high school there. They subsequently renamed the school C.C. Hubbard. And it's now listed on the Register of Historic Places. Now we're getting to the crux of this. 1896, Supreme Court, Plessy versus Ferguson, talks about separate but equal, and it upholds it. Okay? As long as the facilities were equal to, it was okay. 1898, there's a little fella named Galveston Leroy Shipley. I like that name too. Began his schooling at Harrison at 6 years old. We're going to start tracking Galveston Leroy Shipley. 1907, Galveston Leroy Shipley finishes the 9th grade. Now, Harrison had a 9th grade that year. He finishes the 9th grade, he begins to work for a year, and then travels to Sedalia in 2008 to begin George R. Smith College. He worked, went to school, and lived at the college. That wasn't uncommon. The reason he did that was because there was no place for him here in Tipton to go to high school. He had to go elsewhere. There was no choice. And in order to do that, and in order to survive, you had to have money. In order to do that, you had to work. And so that's what he did. 2009, Missouri Legislature Assembly passed resolution establishing state institution industrial school for Negro girls. We know that to be Tipton's correctional facility now, Missouri State Penitentiary. Talk a little more about Galveston Leroy Shipley. He was a teacher and later the principal of Harrison School. And one of the reasons that I'm talking about him, not because he was my grandfather, was because out of the 67 years that Harrison School was a school, he represented 34 years at that school as a teacher or the principal, more than half. He didn't always work as an educator, and even while an educator, he did labor to make his ends meet. 1910, Galveston Shipley is shown as a laborer of odd jobs. He tended to work for a small group of individuals, including Dr. Fisher, the McClay family, the Finley family, Ashurst, Wisdom, and Boyd. For example, Mrs. Justin Boyd, who was worked at the post office, took care of the post office while her husband ran it, and then he became ill at some point. Although there was resentment at the time against blacks holding those positions, Galveston Shipley did almost every type of clerical work at the post office, except for pass out mail at the front counter. Give you a little more about Galveston Shipley. 1913. He marries a wonderful woman by the name of Frances Arvenia Redmond. Okay, so Galveston's mother was a Howard. He marries a Redmond. See the tie? Galveston Shipley recognized his need for continuing education, began summer courses at Lincoln University in Jeff City, and correspondence courses at the University of Missouri in Columbia. At that time, blacks were not allowed to attend Mizzou, not on campus, and so he took correspondence courses from them. He did this type of education for 36 years, trying to expand his knowledge and the knowledge of his students. 1917, World War I. 1917, he registers for it. War ends in 18. In 1920, still shown as a janitor in the census of Willow Fork Township. Frederick Douglass Shipley, to the left there. Galveston Shipley begins working at Harrison School in 1921. After 2 years, he stopped teaching there because they were concerned about somebody from the hometown teaching. And so he stopped there for 2 years, and then he came back in 1925, teaching again. But his salary was that of $40 per month, which was the same amount that his father, Fred Shipley, made working as the janitor at the white school. So, quote from Reverend David O. Shipley Sr., my father. All the books, hand-me-downs from the white school in Tipton. Even the crayons were used. There was no library, no science material, no chemistry. You had only the basics. We did not have geometry. So if you went to college, you were really not qualified. Separate but equal. Just perspective. 29, King is born in Atlanta. 29 to 33, the Great Depression. In 1933, the school board decided to transport the black children to Sedalia. So it gave them a ride to Sedalia to go to high school, to C.C. Hubbard High. 35, the school board tore down Tipton High. Another levy was done, and they built another school. '36, the board decided to have a 2-year high school at Harrison High. Okay. Now, they built another high school for themselves because of overcrowding and those types of things. They decided to they decided to allow Harrison School to have a high school, a 2-year high school in '36. Hortense was the chosen additional teacher. Although they mentioned that there was overcrowding in the school, that's what they did. To do that, to modify that, the basement was converted from coal bins to classrooms. And upstairs, the high school existed. This is kind of the telltale of the separate but equal. I point your attention to one fact. This is the 1937 financial report, 3637 financial report, after they decided to allow the 2-year high school at Harrison School. If you'll note, there's $2,488.06 allotted for new equipment for the white school. There's $147.96 allotted for the black school for the same thing, for new equipment. This is after they decided to let them have a new high school, or to let them have a high school at the school. 1938, the first graduates of this program, including the Chenaults, the Johnsons, the Maupins, the Shipleys, more Maupins, Webbs, and the Wrights. Harrison was required to have 6 students to operate, but when someone was sick, something happened, they had to shut it down. The school board subsequently stopped that high school and started sending people back to high school at C.C. Hubbard. A little more. In his autobiography, he wrote that his parents had the equivalent of a 5th grade education and couldn't help him very much in his studies. His mother had been born enslaved, and his father slightly after that. During his tenure at Harrison, Galveston Shipley implemented Negro History Week observances, health education, vocational work as extracurriculum activities, and he recalled all of that as part of his education and part of the community's education. And he says, I was eager for my people to get all the other what the other races got. So for so long, out-of-state laws held back teachers and pupils alike in Negro schools. Separate but equal was only a slogan, not a reality. But I took the scraps, the hand-me-downs, and the other segregation practices and tried to build up a respect for law and order, self-reliance, the use of what was at hand while we hoped and worked for a brighter day. Just some photos, various classes. Now, it's over here. That's my dad. That's my Uncle James. That's my Aunt Rose. And that's my Aunt Gertie. They were all his students too. Just another class. That little fellow there is my dad. So, again, World War II comes along. That changes Harrison's dynamics. He stopped taking college courses in 1949. Brown versus the Board of Education comes along in 1954, which said that separate wasn't equal. 54, immediately, that year, black students started going to the high school. They were included in the clubs, they were included in the organizations, immediately. There are pictures of them on sports teams and different organizations. 56, state of Missouri, home for Negro girls is closed. And in 57, Harrison is closed. My grandfather wrote another memory, and it says, for over 30 years, I have taught school and felt real thrills at the achievements of youngsters I had contacted. But when I began to teach a little physically handicapped white girl who could not walk nor talk plainly, a sense of real happiness was experienced. When she leaned her little head over on my arm, looked up in my face and smiled, patted me lovingly on the hand and murmured something I could not understand. But from the look in her eyes, I realized she was showing her affection for a teacher who was trying to help her. This photo, 1956, 55, 56. There are some people in this room in this photo. I'll leave it there for right this second. May 30th, 1957, last Harrison commencement. My father provided the address. Last year, almost exactly 1 year ago today, the curators, president, and faculty of Lincoln University bestowed upon Galveston Leroy Shipley a posthumous honorary doctorate of humane letters. Some notable Harrison alumni. Had Bill Lewis, renowned track runner, went to the University of Illinois, had records there, went to the war, became a teacher. Alonzo Redmond, football star, both in high school when he went to Harrison School, but he went to high school in Kansas City. Football star, went to Tuskegee, got his degree there. From Tuskegee, he ended up earning a master's degree from the University of Minnesota. And then later he became teacher, coach, principal at Garrison High School in Chillicothe, Missouri, principal of Lincoln High School in Moberly, and he later became the supervisor for the state of Missouri for education in Jeff City. Joyce Jackson. Joyce Jackson, daughter of Herbert and Julia Jackson, born in Syracuse, Missouri, but came to Harrison School to go to school along with her siblings. Graduated from Tipton High School. Joyce obtained a cosmetology degree in 1966, and she began working at Genevieve's Beauty Salon in Eldon, Missouri. She eventually went on to open her own salon, JJ's Beauty Shop, which was open for 15 years. She had the opportunity to move and work in Sedalia, and she did that and obtained an associate degree from State Fair Community College. Thereafter, Joyce started her second career as a social worker at Missouri Valley Action Agency in Sedalia. She worked there until her retirement after 27 years of service. James Shipley. James Shipley, born to Galveston and Arvenia Redmond Shipley, attended Harrison School. After completing the 8th grade, James, who was naturally and curiously inclined if the mechanics, worked with his grandfather to work on that, James Taylor Redmond. He began working as an apprentice, mechanic's apprentice. Short time later, he left for Kansas City. Then he returned to Tipton and decided to enlist in the United States Army during World War II. James Shipley went on to train at Tuskegee, Alabama to become an airplane mechanic. He spent the majority of his Army service as a crew chief for the 332nd Army Air Corps, known as the Tuskegee Airmen, in Italy. Over the past few years, James Shipley's story has begun to be told. During his time in World War II, James Shipley received at least 6 Bronze Stars. His photo appears in the Black Knights, along with the pilot that he took care of. And that pilot was credited with shooting down 3 enemy aircraft in a single day. And he was also the first Top Gun competition winner. I spoke with that individual several years ago, and he credited James Shipley with keeping him alive during World War II. James Shipley's life story is the subject of Together as One, a book written not too long ago. In the last few years, James Shipley received a Congressional Medal of Honor as part of the recognition for his service. After he returned from World War II, James Shipley worked for Como Electric Threads as their chief mechanic until his retirement. Because of the lack of public high school in Tipton where blacks could attend, James Shipley never attended high school. In 2019, James Shipley was honored with the receipt of his honorary Tipton High School diploma, and Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe presented the diploma to him. James Shipley was also asked by the superintendent of Tipton Schools to be part of the graduation ceremony for Tipton High's 2020 graduates, which he did. We'll leave it right there, and I think there's a special presentation. Linda? Okay, so we'll keep going. And that's how we roll. What about Harrison High School? Okay, has anybody in here never heard of Harrison High School? No one's raising their hands. You've all heard of Harrison High School. Interestingly enough, in 2021, when I did a similar presentation at Tipton High with the junior high and the high school students participating and all the faculty, I think I had one hand that went up that said that they had heard of Harrison High or Harrison School. One hand. That's why we're here. We need to be able to pass on this information. If we don't pass it on, it's lost. If it's not preserved, it's lost. So what are we trying to do? Harrison School is currently owned by Opportunity 1888 Foundation, which was created by some of the descendants and relatives of Harrison School alumni. This was created in 2020. Our mission is to inspire and empower people to value and preserve their historic journey. Objectives: to preserve the physical asset of Harrison School, to preserve the history, landmarks, and presence of Central Missouri's African American community, to serve as an educational, cultural, civic resource to promote Tipton's African American history, implications, and the connections to the larger society, to provide a means to engage in authentic communication of a largely unrecognized shared history, to provide a space where individuals, teams, and organizations can address self-imposed barriers, and to promote a more inclusive society. That one part where I talked about a shared history. Every time in my presentation I would mention Howards, Redmonds, Imhoffs, Duboffs, etc. That's a shared history. It's not just the Redmonds history, it's not just the white Redmonds history, it's not just the black Howards history, it's a shared history. The original puzzle that I put up and said, if you take it apart, you don't get the full picture. Well, if you pull one of those threads out of any of those events that happened historically, you don't get the same picture. If the Redmonds and Howards had not come to this area with their enslaved individuals with them, you would not have Douglas Shipley standing in front of you. I like to be here. So my point is that it's a shared history, not just one history versus another. What do we plan to do with Harrison School? Plan to renovate it. It's 133 years old. I think it needs to be renovated. Preserve the history of the school and its students and the region. Preserving this history does not deny the accomplishments of the other races. It is to acknowledge, highlight, and celebrate the historic and continuing contributions that blacks make to our country. Why is it important to you? It is the history of this country, the state, and Tipton provides a place unique in this country, especially Central Missouri, and you do not get the opportunity to preserve history but once. Okay. Harrison School is unique. How many 19th century schools that taught exclusively black students do you think there are? How many in, let me narrow it. How many in Tipton? How many in Moniteau County? Tipton, Harrison School. It's the last remaining. What we'd like to do in terms of the changes, once we renovate it, get money together and that type of thing, we'd like to present to the world the James Shipley Museum of African American History. The Tuskegee Airmen Museum out of Detroit has already told us that they would loan us some of their material to house in the warehouse or in the material museum. We're going to put community meeting space. This isn't just for this side of town. It's for the Tipton community, the region. History Genealogy Library. Now that's a bold thing, but it's going to provide some of the history, some of the resources that we might be able to provide. This is a workup. I mentioned Trivers, an architectural firm in St. Louis. You can see, again, community meeting space, restrooms, kitchen, conference rooms. It's not just for this side of town. Again, it's for the community. The main entrance will be from the basement, trying to keep ADA compliance and et cetera. Elevator inside. First level, the level that used to have the classrooms, we will have a replica classroom from what it looked like during that period. Exhibit space, gift shop, library for research, et cetera. But this is the future, and this is what we're looking to do with your help. Questions? I was that clear that no one has a single question. They understand exactly what I talked about. Everybody I've ever mentioned, I mentioned 100,000 people and went through 200 years of history, and you have no questions. No? Anybody? Comments? We're good. Is Linda? did you want to do the presentation?
I have a question.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Where did the other students, like in Boonville or
Other cities,
small towns?
yeah, other cities may have had their own high school to go to.
No, I'm talking about the grade school.
Again, they might have had their own grade school, and they might have had their own high school to go to. But in this particular area, anywhere around 8 to so miles of this area, they were coming here. California had its own elementary school and even a high school at some point. Yeah, your dad was in there. I saw it. But they did. They had their own. That school in California was torn down, and nobody can even remember it now. But it was during this. It was a similar track, a similar path. They were about the same age, relatively. Yeah.
Do you know where it was located?
I'd have to look at it. She asked, did I know where it was located in town? But when I asked somebody else about it, they didn't have a clue as to where it used to be. I think it was Garrison High School or Garrison School. I'd have to look. Anybody else?
Just have a question. At what stage? It's a pretty aggressive plan.
Really? Think so, Steve?
I think so. I think so. But at what stage and how far do we have to go?
We talked to his question was, where are we now relative to this aggressive plan of reconstruction? We had an architectural engineer come out, look at the building, assess what the primary needs were. The primary needs had to do with structure in the attic and the roof itself. Those have all been completed. What's going on now, we're trying to get funding to have the architects actually do the physical drawings so that someone can do the actual work. And then once the work starts, obviously, we'll do it in phases. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I've been involved in preservation projects, but the wisest thing is to weatherize it, and that's what's been done.
We buttoned it up.
I really applaud the progress that's been made and the approach that's being made.
Now, I should say that that's taken place since 2020. So from 2020 to now, in 2021, we got it listed on the National Historic Places Register. And we've gotten it buttoned up. We've had architectural discussions. We've talked to the engineer, gotten it buttoned up, et cetera. So we're moving. It's not as fast as we'd like, but we're moving. More questions?
What kind of grants are available? Is there?
We've put in for National Trust for Historic Places grants. We received a small grant from the National Trust for this program today. So those are the things that have the biggest things. But in looking at donations for 501c3s and things throughout the country and historically, most of the money that comes to do these kinds of projects comes locally. Individual donors versus one massive grant from the National Trust. More questions? So we're going to pass the plate now. I'm kidding. No plate. Yes, ma'am.
Do you all have any other events or fundraisers coming up?
We will have another event this fall. We're not sure what it's going to look like, but we know we're going to have one this fall as a general event. On our website, which is opportunity1888.org, we have the opportunity for people to donate just in general, or we have what we call the Brick by Brick campaign, in which people could have their name or someone they love's name put on a brick, and once the renovations are done, they will be permanently displayed in the building, called the Brick by Brick campaign.